Okay, let me talk about this. The knight is this is the new knight candidate. It's the Chrysel Knight of the Weird Root. Okay, I don't agree for a number of reasons, right? But here's the main reason I don't even think about this theory. How do you do this for the people who don't know about the Weird Root? Because I think the story narratively has to make sense for everyone who hasn't done the secret bosses, who hasn't done the egg, who hasn't done the alternate route, who hasn't done anything. I think the narrative still has to make sense. Could Chrysel Knight ever work in that context and make sense for your average player? If you think that it could, then sure, fine. But I don't think so. I don't think you could possibly explain all of that to someone playing the game normally. And I think anytime someone thinks about a Deltarune theory, that has to be kept in mind. It has to make sense for people who don't do the secret bosses or the egg or anything, and just play the game normally. The narrative still needs to make sense. Right? And then also think about some of the things that the game is setting up is going to have payoffs later. Why reveal that the Dark Fountains can revive a dead person, right, with Gerson? Why do that, right? Because would you introduce that for that to solely be used for Gerson and nothing else? I'm not saying this has to be used for the knight. Maybe it could be used for Rudy, Maybe Rudy could be a factor. But when I see stuff like that being introduced, my thought is always, where is this going to come back? I doubt this is going to be used one time. So that's also why I'm like have a lot of stock in the Rousey is a fucking tree or whatever, is a plantner or whatever we're calling it, right? Because why make Flowey so similar to Rousey? Why set up all these parallels? Why talk about what these characters can do and talk about it to the point where every player will notice that? If it wasn't set up for something. And maybe that setup isn't Rousey. I don't know, Yeah, and then Gerson's also the biggest argument against Chrysel Knight, because, the Dark Fountains reflect the will of those who made it. They made a clear point that Susie didn't know Gerson, and so Gerson didn't appear properly, so Chris and Noelle don't know Gerson. It had to be someone from there, which, Des makes sense. There's plenty of other reasons for that. That's how I see it. The reason I buy so much stock into Des as a human is because I think it makes so many plot points the game is setting up have an extra meaning. For example, right, the horned headband. Why make such a big deal pointing out the horned headband and the fact that Chris wears fake horns? Like, it could just be a character moment for Chris. Like, there's a world where that's all it is. It's just a character moment for Chris that helps them, in the narrative. But I don't think that would be a one-time thing. Why have the Holiday House have a whole bunch of souls, have Des have a bunch of human shoes in her closet? Why? Like, is that for nothing? And the other thing that this chapter did that I find really interesting is Aqua, the Cyan or Aqua Soul, I think it's Aqua, right? That character is set up to have a whole ton of parallels with Chris, right? Very obviously a younger Chris, a bit of a prankster, accidentally hurts people, fond of knives, yada, 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 right? And there's a big moment in this chapter where Aqua becomes red and becomes a different color and goes, oh, I get a different color. Do I get a different name? And I don't know if I'm the only person who saw that and thought, I wonder who overwrote Chris's name. I wonder if that is paralleling anyone in particular. Can't be me, though, right? We overwrote Chris's save file. We got a new name with the Red Soul. Didn't we? I don't know if the Red Soul belongs to Des or if it belongs to someone else. My theory is it probably belongs to Des, because that would make a lot of things make sense. First off, and explain why when the knight is introduced, one of the main things they do is they roar and there's a hole in their chest. Why show that they have a vacant hole in their chest if they're not missing something that's supposed to be there? And there's another character that I'm suspicious about when it comes to this, by the way. That's Rousey, by the way. Rousey has had this heart in the middle of their chest, and I'm pretty sure Flowery does as well. And I'm willing to bet that they're able to do something with that there's something important with them in the soul, though I don't know what it is, right? But back to the night, right? Having a hole where the soul could go, you know, right? We're thinking about that, right? The other thing that I would like think about when it comes to that, I don't think the soul appeared out of nowhere, right? Or maybe the soul was supposed to appear out of nowhere. I don't know. But the other thing I think about, and this is usually evidence for Chris Selenite, but I think it also makes sense in this interpretation that Chris has Dess's soul. Remember that the fountains, like, and this is another thing where it's like, hey, they set this up once, they're not going to use it once, right? When Susie makes a dark world, it looks different. When Chris and the Knight make the dark world, and we know for sure that they have both made dark worlds, they look the same. How can you explain that they look the same when they're made by different people? Right? How does that work? Well, if Chris has Dess's soul, and the Knight is also Des, then both fountains could be made by the same person and made by two different people. Because Chris is making the fountains with the power of Dess's soul, if it's inhabiting Chris, right? The same way that Chris is sealing the fountains with that same soul. And Des is just creating them soulless and is never the one sealing them. It's mind twisting, right? Yeah, it's like a little bit in there, but that's what I mean, where there's like all these small things that kind of line up under this interpretation, right? That line up under the interpretation that, you know, Des is a human. A lot of things start to make sense. Because the other thing that's clear is like there's probably some kind of Dark World stuff in the past. The card castle fountain, whatever it was, existed, and Chris had a save file on it. So Chris was in that Dark World before we ever showed up. Right? So there was Dark Worlds before. And then the Asgore stuff goes like, yeah, there's black shards forever ago, back when the incident of whatever the hell happened. Right? So it makes sense. And then also, you know, what tragedy could have happened that made Chris feel so guilty? I think taking someone's soul, or stealing it, or maybe Des gave it to Chris to seal the fountain or whatever could have happened back then, right? Would make a lot of sense. And then, yeah, I don't know what happened with Chris's soul. I don't know if Chris has a science soul. And for the longest time, I was like, the Chris having a different soul would be stupid. But, like, I don't know anymore. Or maybe Chris lost their science soul and Des gave Chris their soul. You know, that could be another way that you could write whatever tragic event happened. Chris did something that made them lose their soul. Des saved them. And because of that, Chris feels this immense amount of guilt and is trying to figure out a way to bring back Des and give the soul back. And you know what else? That would explain why Chris seems to be very less intent on their own survival and care. If the end of this is, well, they're going to give the soul to Des and maybe not survive, then it would make a lot of sense, you know? Why they don't care as much, because there's an end goal for them. Right. The other thing that I would think about, the other thing I'll talk about while we're doing all this theory talk, and I just realized I forgot to start the recording here as well, so that's awesome. The other thing I want to talk about is the game's story, right? Is the game's story. So, dark fountains are an anagram for escapism, right? That's what they are. They're kind of telling that story. They're about escapism, and we're seeing character flaws and character strengths built around it. Like, Susie has an unhealthy dependence on Dark Worlds, right? She effectively sleeps in a school supply closet. It's not healthy. You can't live like that, you know? It's not good. They're too dependent on fiction, right? On things that aren't real to some extent, even if they're, you know, they're kind of real in this instance because Dark Worlds are, you know, complicated, right? But Susie is clearly being too dependent on this world as an escapism. Right? I think whatever happened to Des has to be tied to this main theme of escapism. Right? I think that there could be something tragic that happened, but I think it has to be centered around that theme, because that's what the Dark Worlds are about. So I think whatever happened to that has to be related to that. And I honestly think that's part of why Susie being more of an escapist here is kind of interesting, because I think that this might be potentially a like parallel between Susie and Des that is being built, because I firmly believe that Des is going to also be an escapist. They like hang around in their room a bit. They only really like hanging out with Azrael from what we know. You know, Carol's a bit of a strict parent. They're a bit of a rebel. They didn't blend in as well, right? The Dark Worlds would make sense as an escape for them, right? I think that is going to be Dessa's character flaw. I think that like something like that is going to be how it's going to go, you know? And I think that that parallel between Des and Susie will amount to something later. That is like my thought about that. But like that's all my ramblings for it right now, you know. And I think that's a lot of interesting seeds to see where the game is going to go. And there are other paths than what I'm considering, but it's like I guess I'm trying to explain how I think about theory crafting, right? How I go about explaining things or how I look at things. I'm like looking at the overall narrative. I'm looking at people who've only played the main route and not the other routes, and I'm looking at like what has been set up so far that does not have a payoff, you know? What is being set up that we haven't seen, and how could we see that paid off in the future? You know? So like, you know, that's why when we talk about stuff like Rudy, it's like, okay, Rudy might also be a Gerson parallel. Or is the Knight gonna be a Gerson parallel, right? Like, why do we set up the Night World being the Light World, the Dark World being able to bring back Gerson, right? Someone has to reuse it, and I think it will probably either be Rudy or it'll be to explain the Knight, or maybe even both. You know, maybe they'll get extra value out of that. Why set up all the Plantner stuff? Why set up the flowery parallels, right? Stuff like that. Because I believe Flowery's main purpose in this narrative is to set up Rousey. It's to give us a better idea of how Rousey is restricting himself, you know, and what they're doing with that. Because this chapter is very much about Rousey finding his own identity and becoming less dependent on Chris and all of that, you know. And Rousey is my I like Mew most, but before that, it was Rousey, and Rousey is still really up there in characters for me. I like Mew's design and stuff like that. Rousey is a character I tend to relate to a little bit more in terms of their struggles, right? I think a lot is set up with Rousey here, and it makes me very worried for Rousey in Chapter 6, because this chapter really speedran a lot of their development. You know, not that that's a bad thing, but it's like Rousey got a lot of development. Not many chapters are left. What is going to happen to Rousey? Should when Flowery put it on him. I mean, I think Flowery putting the hat on Rousey and Rousey wearing that old outfit again is supposed to symbolize kind of suppression to me, like suppressing themselves again, kind of stepping back a layer. Because chapter 1 had a lot about Rousey like becoming more of himself as the chapter progressed. Like he started in this big robe, and then there was another layer of like an outfit around him, and then we got to see, you know, how Rousey actually looks after that. It took until chapter 1 to see that. And I don't think it's I don't think it's a coincidence, but that Rousey literally starts this chapter in the fucking closet. Right? I don't think you can get more literal than that, you know, as to where Rousey is as a character. And Flowery is, you know, in this case, kind of teasing Rousey and trying to go like, you know, don't have to be dependent on Chris. You should make your own choices, go for the things you want, become your own person, right? And this chapter has Rousey express the most emotion that they've ever expressed, and they're using abilities that they've never used, and they're attacking, right? Yeah, and there's also the possibility that Rousey is trans, which like that makes sense as a narrative device here, right? I think it'd be interesting if that got full on confirmed. You know, that could be cool. But it's like I think that's the story being told. I think chapter 5 is about trying to make clear that Rousey is not being their own person. That they are acting in the way of like, you know, your typical video game guide thing as it collapses all around them, you know. And I think like that's really interesting. I expected that to be where Rousey goes. You know, I think even post chapter 3 and 4, people were back when people were doing those like fan made Sans boss fights with Rousey, with like the same goal of like Rousey kind of breaking out of their shell. Instead, I mean, we were right on the concept. It's just now it'd be fucking Flowery that does that. You know, harder to predict. You know, so I think all of that is really like this game is just very, very good at subtle storytelling in the background. I think this game is best enjoyed when you replay it. Like, I think the second playthrough is where this game becomes really fun. I always try to play chapters twice for that reason. I'll play it the first time and just go through it really fast and get all the big details in my head and kind of speed run and miss things. And then I'll come back and I'll take my time with it. And, like, when I already have done the playthrough the first time and I've, like, understood what the gist of what happens in the chapter, I get a lot more of a chance to focus on the subtle details. A lot of brain space is kind of freed up, you know? And so that can become, like, useful when you're analyzing the narratives. Like, replaying the chapters end up being even more fun for me. I mean, I think Rouse is likely either the tree or the forest around the entire town. Right? I think there's some kind of planter. I think they're more than just a simple flower or a simple tree. Um, I think one of the strongest evidence for this is there's a piano art cover of like the characters in the light world and the dark world. And in the light world, Rouse is replaced with a tree in the background, like the same yellow tree that we see in the background. And there's a lot of stuff in this game about roots. There's a whole area called roots. There's those kind of trees in the sword root. The town is surrounded by them. They can be a barrier unless you get the sword. Like, there is a decent amount of things set up about the forest environment in this game. So tying Rouse to that would make sense. I feel like Trans Rouse is like half confirmed considering they're called a princess twice in chapter 5. I mean, I don't know if it's confirmed or not, because Rouse still refers to themselves with masculine pronouns a lot of the time. Like, Lovely Boy is the name of the move in this fight, right? But I just fell my controller. I just knocked my shit off the table. I'm sorry. Plug that back in. Right. But I think it's going to be on the road to getting confirmed. Like, this chapter did a lot of heavy lifting for that. Because I've heard of this theory before, and, like, I haven't really been convinced by it yet. It's like, oh, I think they could do this. But I'm not entirely sure if that's what they're going to do. And after this chapter, I'm like, okay, yeah, I think they're doing it. I think this is the route the game is going with Rouse, you know? And I think, like, keep in mind, I'm speaking about this as a straight person, so I could be 100% fucking wrong, obviously. Not my experience, but it's like, my guess is the trans experience here is, like, supposed to be an allegory for Rouse's experience of the other way around, if it kind of makes sense what I mean. Like, I think it's supposed to be another method of showing the character's journey, you know, into becoming their true self. And, you know, that's something that Rouse is very scared by. And I hope they go the full route. I hope that Rouse is a trans character, because I think it would make a lot of sense. I think it would be cool. And trans people do not get a lot of representation where it's deserved. So I think it would be cool. Yeah, we have the blue and pink ticket. You know, like that's another indicator. Rouse starts in the closet. There's a dress in the climbing minigame. Flowery uses princess as a term a lot. You know, like there's clearly a lot of indicators in this chapter. My thing that I'm unsure about when it comes to Rouse is I don't know what the end game for this character is. I don't know how you close off Rouse's story. Because what the game seems to be hinting at is Castletown is going to be sealed away. Right? Like, Flowery literally straight up goes, why not seal your fountain? What does that mean for Rouse? Because I think Castletown is almost certainly going to be sealed. I think that's the final prophecy, or even if it's not, I think Castletown will get sealed at some point. Right? I don't know if that's necessarily a good or bad thing for the story. Like, I don't know if Castletown being sealed will be seen as a good or bad thing. I just think it's something that will happen. Whether it happens because it's forced, or if it happens because of the character's choice, or whatever it is. I think there have been multiple hints that Castletown's fountain cannot last forever. So what do you do with Rouse? Like, is Rouse's endgame actually going to be that eventually they're not going to exist because all the fountains will be sealed? Would that make narrative sense? Would that be satisfying? Maybe? I don't know. And also, like, does it make sense for the game's theme that we talked about? Because we talked about that the Dark Worlds are an escapism metaphor, right? Is the answer for escapism literally just, get rid of it. Don't ever play pretend with cards or on the computer or anything? No, I don't think so. I don't think the overall conclusion to this story should be Dark Worlds are gone forever. Right? I think it's going to be about balancing that world with the light world, balancing the light and dark and achieving a good amount of balance and harmony. So there has to be a limit to it. Some kind of system to where, people can use it, but it isn't going to be too much. Doesn't there need to be a dark world in order to keep the balance? Yes. So I think there has to be some, solution to that long term. So I don't know where it's going to go. That's what I'm thinking. I think I can see the arc Rouse has. I think it's I can see where it's going, but I can't see where it ends. Same for Dark Worlds as a whole. And you know what? That's also okay. I like that there is a lot of things that I am still very uncertain about. And even stuff like Des being a human that I feel pretty certain about. I'm glad I'm not 100%. I'm glad there's space in my mind that it could be wrong, because that's what I think is so fun about this game. I like the idea that there have been so many eras of theory crafting off limited information that some theories survive and some don't and some change, and it's our understanding of everything that we've seen before evolves. How we treat certain dialogue from chapter 3 and 4 will be different now that we have dialogue from chapter 5, you know? I really think that's interesting, and I think that's part of what makes this game such a culturally significant experience. I think the idea that, the community around this game and the theory crafting around it is this ever-building narrative, that develops and changes with the game is interesting, I think that's more than I see on pretty much any other game. I think it's very unique. And to be honest, I'm pretty sure that they're gonna reference that in later chapters. They kind of already have with the bikes, kind of making fun of theorists a little bit, right? But I think that if there is a Gaster reveal a bit, I bet they're probably gonna talk about I have seen all your theory crafting in the real world. It's so very, very interesting, or something like that, right? I think that there will be some meta-narrative commentary on our world, how it interacts with Deltarune and what we do and that kind of thing. I think that will be a plot point at some point. Because, Chapter 3 set up the idea of layers and layers between reality and fiction. We're in one world, and then the light world is fiction, and the dark world is fiction to them, and then the dark world is playing on a TV that has a hero's sword that's in a realm of fiction below where Chris is, and they can cross into each other. It's there's clearly going to be more talk between our connection between us and the light world in the same way there is the light world and the dark world. I mean, Gaster does have a Twitter Blue Sky account. They become the Deltarune account, right? That already happened, So it's I think that kind of thing is going to be explored in the future. But it's just, the game's in a perfect spot when it comes to thinking about it. As much as I want future chapters, I'm totally up to just sit and watch the community, figure shit out and see what people say. I'm excited for that. It's fun. Not every Deltarune theory is my cup of tea. There's a lot that I'll see and I'll be I don't really care about this, but a lot of the speculation, even on some of the more silly sounding stuff, is interesting, even if I'm not directly interested in watching it myself. It's I like the aspect around this game and how we treat it, and how it evolves and all of that. I think it is incredibly special in a way that we're all going to miss when it's over. And that's also why when I see friends who haven't played the game, I'm give it a try. Get into it now. You're going to run out of time to experience the cultural part of this game. You can always play the game, but you're going to miss this part of the game, if you just go through every chapter. No point wondering what things are and trying to put things together if you can just go find the answers later. And yeah, I think that's another thing. I think chapters 6 and 7 will be very, different. It feels like this is the last hurrah to that format. We're done with the eggs. We're done with the shadow crystals. This is, Toby Fox described as, the last adventure before things get more serious. It's I think the overall structure of future chapters is going to change. And I think it kind of has to. I think it is going to get stale if it hasn't already, I think this chapter only really works without getting stale because it kind of plays with that narrative. Like, oh, here's a puzzle, but Rousey will just walk us through it, you know? We don't actually have to do it. You know, stuff like that. It kind of plays on the fact, like, the dialogue for this boss fight is like, oh, I wonder who it is. I hope it's some, like, it's just fucking meta-narrative commentary, and I think that's very intentional of, like, yeah, the players know the format by now. They know what to expect a little bit, you know? Not many people expected Mad Mad Mew to show up, you know, but it's like, people got the gist of it, so it has to change at some point. But yeah. That's a lot of thoughts on Deltarune theory crafting. Hopefully it was coherent. I don't have a script. I didn't plan to talk about this, and most importantly, I know that it's very hard to talk about Deltarune theory crafting without getting lost. And I'm sure this is not the most cohesive ramble that I've done. This isn't really the usual thing that I talk about. But I hope like some of my mindset when it comes to theory crafting was able to be transferred over. I hope I gave you all some interesting thing to think about, you know? Yeah. I think that's gonna be it for the night. It's kind of late. I think it's time to get ready for bed. So, we'll call it here. I didn't record any of these, so I will make these 3 separate videos later. I'll download the VOD and hopefully figure it out at some point. I'll probably download the YouTube one. It'll probably be higher quality. Yeah. What's your thoughts on Sans being potentially important? I do not have enough thoughts on Sans yet, honestly. I think they're clearly aware something is going on, but yeah. Alright, I'm gonna raid Kyo. Kyo's about to fight Jebel.